Reaching the summit of a towering mountain can make you feel like a conqueror, filling you with pride. It's that sense of achievement that often lures adventurers to chase the peaks. However, this feeling can be deceiving, and the harsh reality becomes evident when tragedy strikes. Lives are sometimes lost in the most heart-wrenching waves, as seen in the most tragic mountaineering incidents on the perilous K2 mountain. In the summer of 1986, a brave British climber named Alan Rouse decided to challenge himself by climbing the enormous K2 mountain and the Karakoram Range. Instead of taking the usual path, he chose the tough northwest ridge, which turned out to be a very difficult choice. Rouse and his team faced one problem after another, making it impossible to reach the summit. They had to admit defeat. But Rouse was determined and didn't give up. He joined forces with other adventurous climbers like Alfred Imitzer, Will Bauer, Hans Weiser from Austria, Dobroslawa Midołowicz-Wolf from Poland, and the tough British climber Julie Tullis. Together, they were on a mission to conquer K2. As they were coming down from the summit, they were totally exhausted. Rouse, Imitzer, Bauer, and Midołowicz-Wolf found Tullis taking a nap in the snow, but she and her partner, Dimberger, were determined to keep going. They had reached the summit, but their success was bittersweet. On their way down, Tullis had a dangerous fall, and they had to endure a freezing night with no food or water. When they met up at Camp 4, a terrible storm trapped them. Sadly, on the night of August the 6th and 7th, Tullis couldn't survive the harsh conditions and high altitude, becoming one of the first casualties in the 1986 K2 disaster. The survivors knew they had to act quickly. On August the 10th, when the storm eased up a bit, they set out again. Rouse, despite being the first Englishman to conquer K2, was in terrible pain and had to stay in a tent to face his fate. Imitzer and Weiser also couldn't make it, collapsing not far from Camp 4. With only Bauer, Midołowicz-Wolf, and Dimberger left, their journey became even more challenging. Midołowicz-Wolf lost consciousness while crossing a dangerous rope section and tragically fell to her death. In the end, only Dimberger and Bauer survived the harsh conditions on K2, but their bodies suffered from frostbite. Do you think this incident is the worst mountaineering tragedy? Well, let me tell you about the tragic mountaineering event that occurred in 2008. It resulted in the brutal loss of 11 lives, and the memory of their screams still haunts the slopes of K2. The 2008 K2 disaster brought not only tragic deaths, but also terrible injuries. Two survivors, Wilco van Ruhen from the Netherlands and Marco Confortola from Italy, suffered severe frostbite and lost their toes after being rescued by helicopters. Ruhen, when recalling the incident, shared his terrifying moments. "I thought I saw other climbers and heard voices many times, but then I realized no one could possibly be there. It was really scary when I felt like I was reaching my limits. I worried that no one knew where I was and no one would come back for me." As the group was making their way through the perilous bottleneck, disaster struck around 4 p.m. Dren Mandic, a climber from Serbia, lost his footing and tumbled down the mountainside, leaving his fellow climbers in shock. He briefly managed to stand up, but tragically fell again, beyond help by the time his Serbian teammates rushed to his aid. Mandic had lost his life in that heart-wrenching moment. The tragedy continued when they tried to move Mandic's body. A high-altitude porter from Pakistan named Jahan Beg, who had been hired by the French team, began behaving strangely, showing signs of oxygen deprivation. Tragically, he slipped and lost his life due to the lack of oxygen. Despite these devastating losses, the teams decided to press on toward the summit. However, as they descended in the darkness, a ridge of ice suddenly collapsed upon them, claiming the life of a Norwegian climber. It was a series of heartbreaking events that tested their determination and left them facing the harsh reality of K2's treacherous slopes. But wait, the death storm didn't stop there. Around 4:30 p.m., the first group of climbers reached the magnificent summit of K2. They celebrated their victory one by one, feeling the immense joy of their achievement. But time flew by, and it wasn't until about 7:30 p.m. that the last climbers, Marco Confortola from Italy and Ger MacDonald from Ireland, began their descent. They had to make their way back to Camp 4 in the dark due to their late start. As they descended through the bottleneck at 8:30 p.m., a group of Norwegian climbers faced a terrible obstacle. A chunk of ice, part of the Sirac, crashed down on them, knocking out the fixed ropes that were helping them descend safely. Rolf Bay, one of the Norwegian climbers, lost his footing amidst the chaos of sharp ice. His teammates, Lars Flat Nessa and his wife Cecile Skog, could only watch in anguish as he fell to his tragic death. While some experienced climbers managed to navigate their way down without ropes in the darkness, others who relied on guides found themselves stranded, unable to continue without the vital safety lines. A group of 5 Korean climbers became trapped in the death zone, forced to wait for help as they struggled with the tangled ropes, adding to the mounting challenges of this harrowing climb. High up in the perilous death zone above the bottleneck on K2, Korean climbers and their Sherpas found themselves in desperate need of rescue. Cousins Tersing and Pasong Boat bravely stepped up to help. Meanwhile, climbers MacDonald and Marco Confortola were tirelessly trying to free the tangled Korean climbers. Little did they know that some Sherpas were also making their way up to offer assistance. As time passed, Marco faced a dangerous shortage of oxygen and had to descend the mountain for his safety. MacDonald, however, chose to stay with the Korean climbers, but later he made a fateful decision to start climbing up again. Sadly, this would be the last time anyone would see MacDonald alive. Tersing and Pasong reached the Korean climbers in the afternoon. These climbers had spent a night in the treacherous death zone alongside their cousin, Jumik Bote. Tersing stayed behind to help an injured Korean, while Pasong and Jumik guided the other 2 toward the bottleneck. Tragically, disaster struck when a massive chunk of ice crashed down while they were descending, covering all 4 of them in a chilling blanket of snow and ice. In the midst of chaos, Tersing had to witness the heart-wrenching sight of his own brother and cousin falling to their deaths. It was a moment of unimaginable horror in the unforgiving terrain of K2. Many people wondered why some climbers left their fellow climbers behind on the perilous slopes of K2. Some critics were very upset about this and questioned how they could do it. But the climbers themselves posed a tough question in return. If you were faced with an incredibly difficult task and knew that trying to help would likely result in your own death, what would you do? Let us know your answer to this question in the comments section below. And before that, don't forget to subscribe to our channel.